helping attorneys understand appraisers and appraisals. This is webinar number 1 of the series. Not all appraisers are equal, especially when it comes to being experts for a legal case. Many attorneys do not appear to understand the different types of appraisers that are out there, the different appraisal processes and reports, and the difference between appraisals for lending and banking purposes and legal purposes. There's a different standard, if you will. How the Supreme Court's Daubert ruling and an appraiser's valuation process may impact your case, and the applicability of appraisal standards and how they also impact the credibility of the appraisal report. Appraisals must be in conformance with the Uniform Standards of Professional Appraisal Practice, commonly called USPAP. And unfortunately, I've seen a lot of appraisals delivered for legal purposes that do not conform to the USPAP standards. This is a series of very short webinars designed to help attorneys select the right appraiser for their needs, avoid the weak appraisers who could be very detrimental in a mediation or trial process, locate an expert that can help you, and obtain appraisals that can assist their client and the court in reaching the proper conclusion. And unfortunately, there's a lot of work out there that does not help. In fact, it just is more divisive, if you will, than anything, and help you understand a better understanding of the appraisal system in general. The intent here is to help people understand this process that is supposed to be followed. Unfortunately, there are a lot of appraisers who are hired guns, or what I call form fillers. They're willing to throw a lot of mud at the wall and see if it sticks. They often falsely believe that they're helping you by seeing things your way. And they end up being very biased. And the bias in their appraisals becomes very, very obvious, particularly when they're on the witness stand or something like that. We just did a case in Montana, and ends up the appraiser owned property, and he was there for tax purposes for someone else. And if the taxes were reduced on one property, they'd get reduced on his. So he was more than willing to help. The problem was there was an incredible biases there. So while some attorneys are willing to hire these mudslingers, if they end up opposite of a competent appraiser, these people are going to they're going to look bad, and maybe their reports will fall apart at the most inopportune time. Because remember, for the Daubert ruling, the appraiser's opinion is not persuasive to the court. You don't want to have something like that happen to you. Whether you go to the Supreme Court or not, you just don't want that to happen. So let's break apart the appraisers just a little bit. An appraiser, a person who's certified or licensed, I'll explain that in a bit, by the state to provide appraisals or appraisal services. The appraisal can be an act or process of estimating value. It can be also an estimate of value. Any communication of value. So a lot of attorneys say, well, just give me a verbal appraisal. That way you don't have to spend too much. We still have to go through the same process to give you a verbal opinion as a written. The only difference is all of that typing at the end of it. And appraisals must follow federal and state laws, including that Uniform Standards of Professional Appraisal Practice. We'll talk about that in a follow-on webinar. There's also a thing called the Appraisal Management Company, AMC for short. This is typically an entity that, shall we say, manages appraisers on behalf of a lender, although a lot of appraisers would object to that term. And then again, as I said, USPAP, the Uniform Standards. Throughout, there are federal and state laws that require appraisers to follow USPAP. So it's one of the first things that we do when we review is we try to determine not the value conclusion if it's right. We try to determine if the appraiser has followed the right process going through. So it's in your best interest to at least be familiar with these terms. Well, let's start off with who made these appraisers king. Well, it was a thing called FIREA, the Financial Institutions Reform, Recovery, and Enforcement Act. Prior to 1991, the enactment of this, appraisers were not regulated or licensed. You could put anything you wanted on a napkin, sign it, and anybody could and did. And what they found is that that process just simply did not work, and it led to the first S&L, savings and loan bailout, and so they created a thing called FIREA to make everybody step up. There are approximately 75 to 80,000 appraisers nationwide. The vast majority of them, 55 to 60,000, are residential appraisers, something I'll explain in a moment. Some appraisers are licensed in multiple states. Now, licensing in a state does not mean they're experienced or what we call geographically competent in any particular state. They just obtained a license there. They might obtain a license in Washington and get a reciprocal license in Florida. It doesn't mean they've ever done anything there. Some appraisers obtain multiple state licenses for the pure reason is they want to appear to be more capable or desirable than they really are. They want to impress attorneys, saying, "Oh, I'm licensed in multiple states. Ooh, we'll hire you." It doesn't mean they know what they're doing, particularly in states other than where they are. There's a commercial appraiser in the Seattle area that's licensed in more than 40 states, but I've not seen him provide what I call boots on the ground appraising in more than 3 or 4. He looks good on paper, but I have been opposite him several times, and his experience is sadly lacking. So it's not somebody you would necessarily want to work on your case. There are 3 general types of appraiser licenses, and the type of license or certification must match the property that's being appraised. So let's start with the lowest level. They're called licensed appraiser. They can appraise non-complex residential properties of 1 to 4 units having a transaction value of less than $1 million. Now, the transaction value can be the purchase price of the property or the loan amount. These people are only allowed to appraise very simple properties, subdivisions, normal houses and the like. They are not allowed to do commercial, waterfront, no acreage, no geodesic dome, or or something complex like water damage and the like, because it's complex. And licensed is more along the lines of a starter license, if you will. Then there's a thing called certified residential appraiser. They can appraise all forms of residential properties, 1 to 4, without regard to value. In other words, anything. So they can appraise a mobile home on the Indian reservation to Bill Gates' house in Seattle, which is, a rather large, complex sort of property. If it's residential in nature, less than 4 units, these are the people to call. Then there's also certified general appraiser. There's only one category of this, what we call Cert Gen. Appraisers with this classification can appraise everything, residential, commercial, agricultural, anything that they want, regardless of complexity or transaction amount. So those are your 3 best. Now let me give you a little warning about certified general appraisers. These, while they do have the classification, the license that allows them to appraise anything, whether it's residential, commercial, industrial, ag, whatever it is, these people may or may not have residential experience. Typically, these people focus on commercial, industrial, and to a limited degree, agricultural properties. With such a wide-ranging certification, they may or may not have experience with the type of property that you're dealing with. Now, typically, I do not recommend hiring a certified general appraiser for residential work. When a residential or a certified general appraiser goes through the extra class hours, the extra figuring out how to appraise properties from the income approach and cost approaches and the like, they get kind of a big head about them for good reason, and they only want to do more complex, whether it's appraising the Space Needle or high-rise office in Kansas City or the Astrodome or wherever that used to be down in Houston and the like. Those people can appraise anything. And so it's rare that they do work in residential. So for the most part, there are very few exceptions. I mean, Mark Campos in Seattle is incredible, being able to do everything. But for the most part, I don't recommend them as your first line for a residential problem, but absolutely for anything dealing with commercial. Now, where can you locate some of these appraisers? Well, I'll give you a couple of steps on this one. Number 1, you can go to the ASC.gov. It's called the Appraisal Subcommittee. It's kind of a quasi-government agency that was set up by the FIREA Act back in 1989. And within here, you can come down and go to a national registry. And it creates a list of all appraisers licensed or certified all across the United States. So you can click on Find an Appraiser. This nice window pops up, and you can select the state, the first name, last name, if you know of somebody in particular. You can go all through it, and it'll give you all sorts of information on where they are. Including in this, down at the bottom, you'll see any disciplinary action. So if you've been, you have a recommended appraiser, somebody has said, hey, Bob is really good at what he does. You can come here to this website. You can check to make sure that they are licensed for the type of property that you need an appraisal on. And more importantly, you can go check to see if there's been any disciplinary action issued against that one. I would highly recommend checking on that disciplinary background. I have been opposite appraisers, in fact one 5 times in the last year, and he's been disciplined multiple times by the state. So when he gets up on the stand, some of the first questions are, have you ever been disciplined? He has to answer yes, and all of a sudden the side he's working for, their case starts to crumble. So I'd recommend that you check this. So for instance here, this is a list of disciplined. And so you can see Greg Coates in the state of Washington from Bellingham. He was a certified general appraiser. It was revoked. You can go to Tom Wellbaum. Oh yeah, in Centralia. Same thing. He was a certified residential appraiser, and his was revoked. And you can see the various names of people throughout, and you can go to the states to determine the reason why, but suffice to say, you should check here before hiring some of these people as your expert witness. And unfortunately, I find many attorneys fail to take this very important step. Each state certifies or licenses appraisers individually, and an appraiser must be certified in the state in which the subject property is located if you're going to produce any appraisal, an opinion of value. In addition, every state has a dedicated appraisal department or board. What we're seeing here is the state of Washington's, its Department of Licensing Appraisal Division, it's called. In here you can search for appraisers, you can find out who's been disciplined, there's a box for that as well, and it also comes up with the laws and rules that appraisers must follow. Now again, before you hire, you should go down and click on disciplinary actions to make sure that the appraiser you're considering has not been disciplined. So here it is the appraisal board. If you go down to Arizona, it's called the Department of Financial Institutions Appraisal Division. So different states call them different things, if you will, because they were all set up independent. There's no federal licensing for appraisers. There's no one-stop shopping, if you will, and finding somebody who can do everything everywhere. So it is broken down so that the states have more control, and it is a way of trying to ensure geographic competency. Here's a list, again, of a disciplined appraiser, Derek Chris, failed to collect, verify, and analyze comparable sales data. Well, that seems simple, but apparently this person failed to do it, failed to support the cost approach, failed to maintain complete work files. That would be a problem if this appraiser gets a subpoena from the other side saying you have to produce and there were insufficient files. Your case would start to fall apart at this point in time. You got Robert Case, failed to collect, verify, analyze comparable sales data. Well, isn't that the point, is to determine what the property value is? And if you haven't pulled up the necessary information, well, then how credible can their appraisal reports be? So again, just a place for you to check. Now, numerous private appraisal organizations exist out there in the big world. Each organization has requirements that are in addition or piled on top of getting your government certification. So for any appraiser, your first step is to become state certified, and that is the minimum level of appraiser I would select for your legal argument. There is an optional second step. Once they're state certified, they can then join an appraisal organization. It's voluntary or not. The largest private appraisal organization in the world is the Appraisal Institute. The Appraisal Institute awards designations. SRA is a residential certified. They must take far more educational classes than are necessary to become state certified, almost double the amount. I'm an SRA, and I will tell you that the classes and education I have are 2 to 3 times greater than a certified appraiser. I became certified first, and then go through a whole additional process to become an SRA with the Appraisal Institute. MAI is typically reserved for generally certified. So MAIs, again, twice the education of those normal commercial appraisers I was talking about. And these people specialize even more, and they get more education. This is often where you say, well, gee, we need an MAI. And I've had judges say, well, get an MAI appraiser for this residential issue. And unfortunately, if that's the court order, you have a judge who does not fully understand that MAI typically, not always, focuses on commercial appraising and higher techniques. They do not really do well in the residential world, despite what they may think. But what I will tell you is you will find members of the Appraisal Institute far better educated and more experienced than the typical appraiser out there. So it is one of the places you should go to look. If you go to the Appraisal Institute's website, right there on the front page, they have Find an Appraiser. So you can put in your zip code if you want and say how many miles, give me everybody within 5 miles or 10 or whatever it is. When you go here, now you can search for a specialist for industrial property, agricultural or something like that, eminent domain issue if that's what you have. The states don't keep track of it like that. You can't go to a state or the ASC website and say, hey, give me somebody who knows all about railroad properties. They don't keep track like that. The Appraisal Institute does. Now, it's no guarantee that you're going to get a really good person, but at least these people are trying to become better and have double to triple, if not far more than that, education than non-members. I am a member of the Appraisal Institute with the SRA designation. Now, when you click on it, and let's say you search for where I am in the Seattle area, up pops my name on the lower left-hand corner, and then down low you will see, well, what sort of property types do I do? Residential, land, recreational, special purchase, purpose, that sort of thing. And if you come over here to Randy, the next one, he's an MAI, so right there, he's commercial license certified, and he's obtained the MAI designation from the Appraisal Institute. And if you see, he specializes in commercial, industrial, and special purposes. Where I'm residential, he's commercial. And the same thing for Keith, right next door. And so you can get a complete list of here, and you've got multiple people. Now, in addition, lenders have their own private list of appraisers that are allowed to do business or are blacklisted from them. And maybe it's because they did poor appraisals or poor business practices. A lot of appraisers, they can be very good at determining value, but they're not very good at running a business, and so appraisers keep their lenders keep their own internal list of who's there. So if you decide on hiring a particular appraiser, one of the first things I would ask is, have you ever been disciplined or removed from the state? Have you ever been disciplined or removed from a lender or AMC's approved list? Don't always expect the truth, but I would at least ask, particularly in depositions. So, state certification does not guarantee that an appraiser is capable of providing a competent appraiser's typical standard of care, that little thing that we use often. Large multi-state banks, credit unions, and lenders often hire the cheapest appraisers they can find. Rarely do they hire the best. That's why you've seen a wipeout of Washington Mutual, Countrywide, IndyMac, and lenders like that. Is their top people said you got to hire the cheapest, quickest, fastest appraiser, and they were just kind of form fillers, if you will. A study there, due to a lot of this form filling, there was a study of 3,500 bank appraisals in Arizona and found that 90 to 95% of them contained egregious errors sufficient to result in a state disciplinary action if they'd been turned in. Yet the banks were accepting these appraisals because, well, that's what it was a bucket filler item for a lot of these institutions, which is one of the things that led to our S&L and bank problem that we had in 2007, 8, 9, 10, 11. See, some lenders seek out the cheapest. Some, not all, there are some good ones out there, but they seek the cheapest appraiser. If they can find an appraiser desperate enough to provide an appraisal for $350 or less, they know that appraiser can be pushed around. We start, for instance, at $850 for a typical appraisal in the Seattle area. That's our starting point. We go from there. So if you're finding somebody at $400, $300, they're likely not the best. They're likely desperate for business. And some banks look for them because the banker's figuring, if there's any problems, we can tell the appraiser how we want them to craft or mold the appraisal. We don't care if it's done right. So if you're in the legal side of this, you don't want to deal with some of these cheap appraisers. See, a lot of lenders, have absolutely no problems with finding what I call disposable pawns, the cheap appraisers. They look for the cheap ones, use them, abuse them, and if something goes wrong with the loan, then they blame them. They'll throw the appraisers under the bus. Those are not the people you want for your legal cases. In the appraisal world, price can equate to the quality of an appraiser and the appraisal service provided. Again, we start at $850 for an appraisal and go up. And that's in Washington, Oregon, Arizona, Montana, and the like. So if you're finding somebody in the $400 or $500 range, they may not be your best choice for your legal issue. So let me show you an example of a couple of these things. I cut and paste from appraisals when we do the reviews of them. Here's this contradictory statement from an appraiser. Comp number 3, no adjustment has been made for noise. Well, okay. But then right underneath it, he says comp number 3 was adjusted for freeway noise under location. Contradictory statements. This is not somebody you want to be working with for your legal issue. This was a lender said, hey, Mr. Appraiser, please provide the address for comparable number 2 within your appraisal. And the appraiser responded, the correct address is... Seriously, that was the appraiser's response. I don't create this. We just cut and paste what we see. And this one, note to the reader of this report, a lack of similar properties as sold and or listed is noted in Williams County. It's no wonder that realtors are investigating other opportunities of employment. Seriously, that was the text within an appraisal report that was shipped to a bank. This is not something you need in an appraisal report for some legal purposes. Particularly if I'm on the other side of that argument, I'm going to find that and I'm going to point it out. And the attorneys, well, it's just going to be very embarrassing for somebody. Because of this, I just want to show you the importance is there is lots and lots of lawsuits. Here's one, it's called ResCap, Residential Funding Company. They were like a Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac, a secondary lender. These banks that you see listed here would do appraisals and do loans, perform loans, and then they would sell these loans to ResCap. And all of these lenders said, yes, we've reviewed the appraisals, yes, they're all fine, they're all wonderful. But after ResCap acquired these loans started to go bad, and they found out that the appraisals, 95% of the time, were poorly performed, did not follow USPAP, and resulted in overvaluations and bad loans. Whether the loan payments are made or not isn't the issue. It's that there was a lot of problems for these people, and foreclosures and problems did start. So this is just one of dozens upon dozens of lawsuits that are out here based upon poor quality appraisers who typically work for lenders. That's not something you want if it's a legal case. Now, in addition, most appraisers start their careers by providing appraisals for the banking world. They do that because there's specialized forms, they need specific information. It's kind of fill in the blanks sort of appraisal process, if you will. And convention loans are the most common, and any licensed or certified appraiser can supply these. VA financing requires an appraisal who is certified and, in addition, has also been appointed to the VA appraiser list. Typically, 3 to 4 appraisers in any area are on that list because the VA doesn't need a large number of them, except in outlying areas where they're desperate for them. Appraisals for VA or FHA have additional requirements. The appraiser must go out and look at the property and see if it meets the FHA's or VA's minimum property condition. It needs the house to have no need for a major repair, no need to replace the roof within 7 years, no dangerous decks like you see. It has to make sure that the electrical and water systems are working. It's a little bit more of a detailed inspection than a typical appraisal. It's almost on the edge of being a building inspector. It's not, but just understand that there's a little bit more that's involved with that sort of thing. So banks will lend on any type of property, even those that you see right here, because they change the down payment amounts. Where for VA and FHA, it's usually 0 to minimum down, and so in that case, there's a greater risk, and they want the properties to be in better condition. So the appraisers must be a little more finicky in their detail within the appraisal. So, the majority of appraisers do not do their jobs adequately. I'm very embarrassed to say that. It's unfortunate. Many old-time appraisers believe that the appraisal is nothing more than, well, it's my opinion. I've been doing this for 30 years. And they just use an appraisal form to deliver their opinion. This is especially applicable to older MAIs who were trained in a different era and believe that their certified general credentials and MAIs are sufficient to do residential work. In some instances that it is, but the majority of them it is not. And this mindset simply comes at a time before there was computer checking of appraisals and the ability to look at adjustments and the accuracy of the information. So the advanced systems of today, they didn't exist 5 and 10 years ago, and so a lot of appraisers simply were doing things based upon their subjective opinion, and you need an appraiser who is better at quantifying a problem. So if you have an issue dealing with the square footage of a house or flood damage or fences or views or something like that, you need an expert witness that is able to quantify that damage and the impact on value, not just scratch their belly and come up with an opinion like some of the olders. So this is where the newer appraisers are actually going to have some advantages. Now, not every value problem will require only an appraisal. So let's kind of go through that as we kind of wind this up. Maybe your argument is over the total value of a property. Well, then you'd need an appraisal. So for a bankruptcy, divorce, fire insurance loss, eminent domain, property taxes, estate taxes, failure to disclose, somebody didn't tell you about the failed septic tank system, then what you need is a competent appraiser. But if you have damage to a property, there's a property dispute, loss of view or a portion of the view, poor construction, a failure to disclose a sewer connection or something like that, then you will likely need an appraisal and a market value study, a second portion of that. In this case, you're going to need a specialist in unusual appraiser assignments. And that goes back to the Appraisal Institute and kind of selecting some of those people. If you have a simple property only requiring a value statement with no chance for this appraisal to end up in court, then match the appraiser's certification with your property type. So if you have a commercial or industrial property, a certified general appraiser is what you're going to look for. If it's agricultural, again, certified general, but make sure they're an agricultural specialist. That's very, very limited. I only know of 2 or 3 per state. Very limited. If it's residential, a certified residential appraiser is what you need. If your argument is a legal complex property type, unusual, geodesic dome in the middle of downtown Seattle or something like that, or if there's a chance that this will end up in mediation or trial, then again, match the property type with the certification And then in addition, try to look for an SRA or MAI designations and somebody with 15 or more years of experience. That'll be very important to you so that they have the experience in some of the twisted things that are out there. I have found that some of the best expert witnesses, because that's what you're here for, only a portion of that appraiser's business is bank appraisals. The majority of their business is for private or legal purposes. They have enough experience, enough knowledge that they don't have to deal with the banking on a day-to-day basis. It's only kind of an infill. And that's what you're looking for. Somebody who does a little bit of banking and other things, has years of experience, and I think a teacher. Somebody who's teaching at the college or universities or something that's out there. Teachers have this experience in explaining things to students, and I find that that same experience can be used to talk to juries and or a judge. Ask these people, how often do they teach? Where do they teach? You'll find that if they can create a good, warm relationship with your jury or judge, it's a very good thing for you. And so ask if they teach. Often our newest clients come from attorneys that were on the opposite side of the argument last time around. When we make their expert witness look kind of foolish in what they're doing, usually for the next case, they hire us. So that's very nice. You should look around at your bar education events. You know, everybody in the room, I used to go to the bar and get their education. So I find that other competent appraisers will sometimes show up at those. So ask around, look around. Again, you can go to the Appraisal Institute and search. And I'll tell you, it goes, no matter what, you should start off with what experience do you have as an expert witness in this issue, whatever that is. And how many times have you provided testimony or been in a deposition? Because if it's once or twice, that's a weak person. But if they've been around a couple of times, everything will make your case a little bit better. So, appraisers do not establish value. Buyers and sellers do. Appraisers provide written support of that. And what the appraiser is supposed to do is provide an accurate description of the property and an adequately supported estimate of value. That's the key. So we're not gods. We don't determine everything. We just analyze the information and provide written support or proof of that. The point of this presentation is to help attorneys find higher, superior appraisers and not be caught with the empty-headed form fillers and ripped apart at the most inopportune time. In follow-up videos, I'll explain the rules and standards, the federal definitions of market value, which creates a big conflict between agents and others, and frankly, how to spot some deficiencies. We'll be doing a series of little short videos like this for you. My name is Richard Hagar. I am an SRA. You can see my background right here. I am a real estate broker, an appraiser, SRA with the Appraisal Institute. I do fraud profiling for Homeland Security, law enforcement. I try to provide a compliance instruction for banks and mortgage brokers and the like. And I'm the chairman of the International Association of Financial Crimes Investigators, the Mortgage Fraud Task Force. So I do understand complex issues beyond simply appraising, because I helped write the law and help support fraud investigation. If you need any more information on me, you can see where to look this up, AmericanAppraisals.com. My resume is on the left-hand side. You can go there. So thank you for listening.